It feels as if everyone and his cousin has made a video review about Tyranny, and why it's a good game, or even a great game, and why you should play it. To be sure, it is a great game, and you should play it. But I don't really want to make that sort of video, though it can be difficult to avoid. Instead, I really just want to talk about what I appreciate about the game, and the aspects of the game that I think are fairly unique, making it one of a kind. Despite this, there probably is going to be some overlap with more standard reviews, as this can be unavoidable. Beyond this, I wish to address the elephant in the room, the issue of why, despite being such an absolutely incredible CRPG, Tyranny was apparently a commercial failure, which has condemned this wonderful IP to the dustbin of history, despite it being a fantastic game, as I know of no one who is a CRPG fan that has played it but didn't like it, and in most cases, love it. So why is Tyranny actually a unique game in the CRPG genre? Because of its world building, which is some of the best I have witnessed in fiction in years, because it draws upon seldom used fictional and historical settings that you only rarely see realized amongst RPGs, and combines them into something that I can honestly say you won't find anywhere else in the modern CRPG genre. And most of this is achieved through a combination of familiar, although improved upon RPG elements, with a novel and differently implemented world and setting. The idea behind Tyranny originally started when Obsidian wanted to make a role-playing game called Fury, which they attempted to pitch to various publishers in the year 2006. The concept behind it was a land ravaged by a magical apocalypse. This was then further refined into a game potentially called Defiance, which included the original idea of Fury, but also introduced a land where evil had already won and conquered the good guys. And eventually, all these projects were folded into one called Stormlands, which Obsidian were able to successfully pitch to Microsoft in 2012. But due to the uncertainty in the market at the time, the game was cancelled, and Obsidian was forced to let go of 30 employees, whereupon Obsidian itself was at risk of having to shut down. Eventually they were able to recover with Pillars of Eternity and Kickstarter, and since they had retained the rights to Stormlands, they eventually made the sales pitch to Paradox Interactive, and Tyranny was born, incorporating all the older concepts from the previous potential games, as well as a few new ones. So the question is, what makes Tyranny so compelling as a game? The world of Tyranny is called Tyrantus, and it is its greatest strength, and in my personal opinion, the most salient and important aspect of the game. Most modern Western RPGs have their roots in D&D and traditional Lord of the Rings-esque fantasy, but Tyranny does these things differently. Unlike the tried and true swords and sorcery setting, although I have no hard data on this, it seems very likely that Tyranny drew upon certain aspects of Dark Sun, the brutal and unforgiving world of Athas from 1990s D&D. Tyrantus is a fairly brutal world with limited resources, dominated by a potentate called Kairos, an immortal being of immense magical power, of indeterminate gender and age, and deeply mysterious, in again a similar fashion to the infamous Sorcerer Kings of Athas in the Dark Sun setting. Both Dark Sun and Tyranny draw upon a forgotten age of history that tends to be far less common in popular imagination in the modern context, and is only rarely implemented in fictional RPGs. There's also the striking combination of the ancient Near East and Bronze Age Greece made digital. Although I cannot prove it, Obsidian almost certainly drew upon elements from these regions and epochs. This alone sets it apart from the vast majority of CRPGs, steeped in traditional fantasy, which for the record, I have nothing against. On Tyrantus, iron is rare, and most equipment is made of bronze. The level of technology, although not one-to-one, is reminiscent of Bronze Age Greece. The landscape itself is reminiscent of ancient Mesopotamia, with the buildings, structures, and ambiance reminding the player that one is far away from the conventional fantasy setting, and perhaps in some kind of ancient, fantastical Sumeria. Among the cowering and insignificant masses, there are unique beings called Archons, men and women who through particular circumstances discover great magical power within themselves and become ageless in the process. And the landscape is dotted by massive magical structures called the spires, towers so high they pierce the clouds. In the world of Tyrantus, good and evil have little meaning, and you play as a minion of Kairos called the Fatebinder. You are given the ability to cast judgments and read so-called edicts, which are immensely powerful magical decrees that can level entire cities, rend the earth over vast distances, rain fire upon the world, or cast eternal darkness upon the land, and far worse. You do this in service to Kairos, but how you go about this is ultimately up to you, and therein lies some of Tyranny's greatest strengths. Tyranny offers an immense freedom in how you go about your task in service to Kairos. You can be evil, good, selfish, or any combination of these things, however you wish to define them. There are several paths, and how you choose to play has consequences for how the story itself plays out. Noteworthy consequences, I might add. On top of all of this is the simple fact that Tyranny manages to pack an incredible amount of story and deep CRPG mechanics into a relatively short tale. Oftentimes, short sounds bad, but in the case of Tyranny, the duration of the game is perfect for multiple runs, with different choices and results. A typical Tyranny run might only take 25 to 30 hours, fairly short by CRPG standards, and yet, it works surprisingly well for the game, very well even. Beyond this, there are important factions in the game, and your degree of favor, or lack of wrath as it is called, can give you special abilities, as well as wildly different interactions with the factions. And what would a CRPG be without companions? All of your companions have interesting and compelling backstories, and mechanically unique abilities that fit their personal background and story. And I wouldn't be the first one to fawn over the magic system of Tyranny. It allows you to combine different spells of different types in various ways, resulting in mixed visual and gameplay effects, and I and many others find it absolutely incredible. Now, of course, I could go on, but the point of this, more than anything else, is to explain why I think Tyranny is one of the best CRPGs ever to be made. And yet, it did have one fatal flaw, a flaw that condemned it to extinction. That simple flaw is that it purportedly did not sell very well. I say purportedly because the evidence for this game not selling well is not terribly good. It's simply an assumption people have made because we never got a sequel. And however good the game is, it appears in many ways to be unfinished, and its ending simply begs for some kind of second game. So what really happened? Let's first start with a claim that people tend to make, and it's one that makes sense. Tyranny did not sell well. It's logical to assume because usually when games don't sell well, the respective IPs are rarely renewed. However, having looked into this, in an older developer stream, it was stated that it sold some 3 million copies, and that the number could potentially be much higher, as other sources indicate. Some people managed to read the Steam database some years back, which indicated that there might potentially be as many as 7.2 million owners based on the number of reviews, with VG Tracker and Steam Spy suggesting the numbers closer to 5 million. Regardless, though, all things considered, these things don't seem like terrible numbers for a relatively compact game that probably was not terribly expensive to make. Indeed, these seem like decent numbers. But then again, we have no idea what the sales target was set by Paradox Interactive. Remember that Tyranny was made by Obsidian Entertainment, and was published and therefore owned by Paradox. And we've never learned what Paradox Interactive's financial goals were. To top all this off, if Tyranny indeed did not sell well, or at least did not meet the sales expectations of Paradox Interactive, Paradox themselves are partly to blame, because of the very poor job they did at advertising. Tyranny was first announced at the Game Developers Conference in 2016, and a later demo was shown at E3 2016. But that was about it, nothing after that. Tyranny's reception was very positive, receiving a Metacritic review of 80 out of 100, and generally very positive reviews on Steam, and we simply don't know what the exact margins were in terms of sales, assuming that it did in fact sell decently well, which, based upon the little evidence we do have, I think did happen. So, what happened? Why is it that we don't have a sequel? Here we can only enter into the realm of speculation, but I have a theory that probably accounts for the reason as to why we will never see a sequel, or for that matter, any other games utilizing this IP. Approximately 2 years after the release of Tyranny, Obsidian Entertainment was bought up by Microsoft, becoming one of the legions of studios that Microsoft owns. This has been explained by Fergus Urquhart as a necessary move for Obsidian in order to secure the financial existence of the studio, as they had in previous years moved from one publisher to the other or had to use Kickstarter and had been very close to closing. With Microsoft, Obsidian finally obtained some form of financial security. Now, assuming that there had been plans for a sequel to Tyranny, and the different endings highly imply that this is the case, as they seem to beg for a what happens after this scenario, and given the parts of the game that seem a little less than polished or even missing, it seems clear to me that the original intention was to follow up the first title with at least one other game. This, however, would never come to pass, since if Obsidian had wanted to make a sequel, and the evidence we have supports this, how could they, whilst being owned by Microsoft, but the Tyranny IP itself is owned by Paradox Interactive? They probably were planning, and maybe even making a sales pitch, but the second they were acquired by Microsoft, none of that was possible anymore, and so the dream of a Tyranny 2, or whatever else it might have been called, went up in smoke. In order to render a sequel possible, Microsoft would have to buy the Tyranny IP from Paradox Interactive. But why would Microsoft do that? In light of all the shutdowns, the consolidations, and the increasing focus on large-scale, well-selling IPs, what would the likelihood be that Microsoft would want to do this? Slim to none. And moreover, what motivation would Paradox have to sell it to Microsoft? Obsidian is already teetering on the edge of existence, with Avowed being a possible crucible and test for the future, and there's no logical reason as to why Microsoft would want to take this chance. Certainly not in this market. I obviously can't prove this definitively, but this is most likely how things played out in my mind, and it's probably the reason why, for all its amazing qualities, storytelling, and innovations, despite being one of the greatest of CRPGs, Tyranny is also CRPG's greatest tragedy, an eagle that was never allowed to properly spread its wings and soar, and one of gaming's greatest losses. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It'd be much appreciated, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.